You ever stop and wonder how a single faith, one that started with just one person, could end up with thousands of different churches, all with their own traditions and beliefs? It's this incredible story, right? Spanning 2,000 years, shaped by empires, rebels, you name it. So how did one faith become so many different faces? Well, let's dive in and trace the branches of this amazing story. Okay, let's just start with the sheer scale of it all. That number you're looking at, 2.2 billion, that's how many Christians there are in the world today. It is by far the largest religion on the planet. To put it another way, about 1 in every 3 people you'll ever meet identifies with this faith in some way.
And this isn't just about numbers, it's about reach. This is a truly global faith. I mean, from the most ancient communities in the Middle East to these massive modern megachurches in places like Africa and South America, Christianity has just sunk its roots in everywhere and created these unique expressions in pretty much every culture on Earth. Which, of course, brings us right back to our big question. How in the world did one movement, one core faith, branch out into this huge, complicated, and, let's be honest, sometimes contradictory family tree?
All right, so to figure this out, we're going to trace the growth of this incredible tree. First, we'll look at the roots, what everyone has in common. Then we'll get to the first huge split, the Great Schism. After that, the Protestant Reformation, which is where things really explode into new branches. From there, we'll see what the modern spectrum of faith looks like and wrap up by asking, hey, can these branches ever really grow back together?
So before we get into all the splits and the arguments, what's the common ground? What are those foundational beliefs that really make up the core, the trunk, if you will, of this massive tree? First thing to remember is that Christianity didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It actually started as a movement within first-century Judaism. It was centered on the teachings of a man named Jesus, and his followers believed he was the long-awaited Messiah. But at the time, their beliefs were just one interpretation of Jewish scripture among many. Now, from these Jewish roots, one of the most unique and frankly mind-bending doctrines started to form, the Trinity. This idea that God is somehow one single being, but also 3 distinct persons at the same time, became a core belief for most Christians and a really key point where it started to diverge from its origins. But if there's one thing that is the absolute bedrock of the whole faith, is the resurrection. More than any other teaching, the belief that Jesus was crucified, died, and then came back to life was what his early followers pointed to as the ultimate proof. It's not just an idea. For them, it's the cornerstone event of history. And the growth of this movement, it was absolutely explosive. In just a few hundred years, it went from this small, often persecuted Jewish sect to the official state religion of the entire Roman Empire. And that alliance with imperial power, well, it set the stage for its global spread, but it also sowed the seeds for its first major internal division. And that brings us to the first giant fork in the road for the church, the Great Schism. We're talking about a split between East and West that has now lasted for almost 1,000 years. It's a huge deal.
So what caused this massive split back in 1054? Well, it had been brewing for a long time, but it really came down to 2 major issues. First, power. The Church in Rome said the Pope had supreme authority over everybody. The Church in Constantinople said, no way, he's just the first among equals. Second, theology. The Western Church added a single Latin phrase, the filioque clause, to a core creed. The East completely rejected that change as illegitimate. So that mix of politics and doctrine, it finally just snapped the church in two.
And you can literally see the split. It wasn't just about ideas. 2 totally different cultures grew out of it. On the left, you've got the iconic onion domes and the rich iconography of Eastern Orthodoxy. And on the right, you see that soaring Gothic style and the beautiful stained glass that became the signature of Western Christianity. They really became 2 different worlds.
So for nearly 500 years, Christianity was really defined by this East-West divide. But then, in the 16th century, another earthquake hit the Western Church. And this one didn't just split a branch, it shattered it into 1 million little pieces.
The spark, as you probably know, was lit in 1517. A monk named Martin Luther famously nailed his 95 Theses to a church door. Now, at first, he was just criticizing the church for selling indulgences, these pieces of paper that supposedly reduced your time in purgatory. But what started as a call for a little reform, well, it quickly spiraled into a full-blown challenge to the Pope's entire authority.
At the very heart of the Reformation were 2 pretty radical ideas. First was sola fide, which means faith alone. The argument was that salvation is a totally free gift from God. You can't earn it through good works or church rituals. Second was sola scriptura, or Scripture alone, which said the Bible, not the Pope or church tradition, is the ultimate authority for a Christian. I mean, together, these ideas just completely blew up the power structure of the Roman Catholic Church.
So you can imagine what happened next. The Reformation basically opened the floodgates. Once that central authority of Rome was broken, new interpretations and new denominations just started multiplying like crazy. And that brings us to the wild and varied spectrum of Christian faith that we see all around us today.
So you get groups like the Anglicans, right? The Church of England. It broke from Rome, sure, but more for political reasons. Theologically, it tried to carve out this middle way, this via media, keeping some of the Catholic-style rituals and structure, but mixing in Protestant ideas. It's a perfect example of how messy and complex these new branches could get.
Then you have other groups that formed around specific lifestyles and disciplines. The early Methodists, for instance, were all about living a very structured, holy life. We're talking about specific rules: wear plain clothes, fast once a week, no drinking, no gambling. It was this intense focus on a disciplined personal faith that created yet another, completely distinct Christian identity.
And the branching just kept going. Fast forward a couple of centuries to 19th century America, and you get entirely new movements sprouting up, like Christian Science, founded by Mary Baker Eddy. This wasn't just a reform of an old church, this was a totally new theological system.
And the ideas here really show you how far the branches could grow from that original trunk. A central belief in Christian Science is that the material world, including things like sickness and even death, is basically an illusion, and that reality is purely spiritual. That is a world away from the ideas that were being debated in Rome or Constantinople.
So, after all these centuries of splitting and splintering and going in 1,000 different directions, it brings us to a really important final question. Is anyone trying to bring these scattered branches back together?
And the answer is yes. In the last century, there's been this powerful movement toward unity. It's called ecumenism, and it's actually had some incredible results. Get this, the very excommunications that started the Great Schism in 1054, they've been mutually revoked by the Catholic and Orthodox churches. Even more amazing, Lutherans, Methodists, and Catholics have actually signed a joint agreement on justification by faith, the very doctrine that was at the absolute heart of the Reformation.
Now, these are amazing, hopeful signs. But let's be real, huge differences in belief, in culture, and in how churches are run, they all still remain. So the real question for the future is this. After more than 1,000 years of growing apart, can this vast, diverse, and scattered family of faiths ever find a way to truly heal its divisions and reconnect to that original trunk? The story, as they say, is still being written.